do you not like dogs? I can move her. Are you okay with dogs? Okay, okay.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I'm so pleased to have James R. Benn here at the store. This is one of my favorite series, and I've been privileged to read it in real time, all the way from Billy Boyle, the very first one, up to this one called Proud Sorrows, which has a wonderful plot. It's also our historical mystery book of the month. So
Thank you for that.
you're welcome entirely. But I would like to start out by just saying a word about an author that we much miss, Anne Perry, who died in April. And she was always way ahead in turning in her books. So the new Alina Standish book came out yesterday, I think it was. Patrick, we have it here. And it's possible there's going to be another Anne Perry book somewhere, but that may be it. But the reason I mention it is that we were very close for a long time. Patrick was very fond of her. Bill was very fond of her. And her executor, winding up her estate, gave me Anne's earrings. So I am actually wearing
Oh.
Anne's earrings. And I don't know, I thought it would be appropriate for a British historical
Hmm.
mystery if I were here sitting with Anne Perry's earrings. So there we are. I have other ones, but these seem to be the best for the job. So
Absolutely.
I know it's hard to lose. But Jim and I were talking at dinner. It's hard to lose an author, but for you readers, it's also really hard to lose an author because the characters go with it, him or her. So it's always nice in a really long-running series if the author um, has kind of a plan for. Remember Agatha Christie, who put the last Poirot in a
Right.
vault,
Yep. Yep.
so that whenever she was gone, I can't remember. Does anybody remember the title of the last Poirot? Patrick, you can look it up on your phone. I know. The last Hercule Poirot. She left it in a.
Was that the Postern of Fate, or am I mixing that up?
I can't remember. But anyway, she knew that readers would like to have a final Poirot, although he had so little personal life that, I'm not too sure that it was, necessary if it worked out that way. Anyway, Billy Boyle has a long way to go because fortunately, he's only progressed for a very, well, we're in 1944, right?
We're at the end of 1944. Yep. So he's been at this for 2+ years, which is a lot of war to go through. But there's still
Wait, 2+ years?
May 42.
Was that Billy Boyle?
Yeah, that's when Billy
For
Boyle
some
takes
reason, I
place.
thought it was earlier. I thought it was in 41, but we
Yeah.
didn't really come into the war.
Right. It would have just been after Pearl Harbor and getting into the
Right.
army. So it was May when Eisenhower was sent over. Um, so it's been about 2.5 years
Okay.
almost. And I was telling Barbara that whenever people would ask me, Do you know if how you're going to end the series?" I would say, "Well, don't worry about it. There's so much war to go, but now it's winding down. So I'm finding ways to have stories that take place like within a week, and then miraculously the following week there's a new adventure. So hopefully we'll be able to keep it going."
But that works for historical fiction because theoretically everybody's dead. So if you're only aging them a week or two at a time, it
Right.
hardly matters. Yeah. But and also the way you've written this series, we get to go to a lot of different war theaters, and the stories. Um, do you shape the stories for the theater, or do you decide on the story and pick the place?
Uh, this place picked itself because I knew I wanted to do something a little different. I tried to modulate the stories so that there's not two stories that are very similar to like two battlefield stories that are very much alike. And I decided it was time to give these guys a break and let them have leave because that hasn't happened yet. So they have leave, but so where to send them? Um, and I had to go back to the first Billy Boyle to see where I had placed, um, you know, if you know the series, you know who I'm talking about, Sir Richard Seton, Diana's father, where his estate is, because I had just picked a place out of the map, from the map, back in 2004 when I wrote it. But it was in Norfolk, and it coincidentally happened to be in the stomping grounds of Dorothy L. Sayers and Lord Peter Wimsey and the Nine Tailors. It's the same territory around um, the Wash, an inlet off
It's
the
not
Norfolk
really
coast.
an inlet. It's a
It's a-
gigantic
it's an
chunk.
estuary, I
Yeah,
think. Yeah.
it isn't, but it's a complex estuary with shifting sands and very dangerous to cross. If you know your British history, you will know as we go through this book part of what goes on when he keeps referencing the Wash. So read the book and then look it up. Don't do it the other way around or you'll spoil stuff.
So that's a case of the setting really starting to
Yeah.
tell the story, because that's it made sense for them to go there to have a peaceful vacation in a quiet English village, and we all know what happens when you go to one of those. So there was
I
a
have
body.
to say, it's a plus of British history that 800 years can pass and you can still have relevance in the 20th century to something that happened in the 13th century. Right. You got to love that about Europe as opposed to, well, we could do it here, except that the nations that were here didn't have great written records and other things. But we're finding a lot more of it. There's a lot of books coming out here about the history of this continent and all from the Native Americans' point of view, which is quite a different perspective than the Western point of view, so to speak. But anyway, you're in Norfolk, which has a very nice geography, and the village that Sir Richard Seaton's estate is near, they're high cliffs looking over the Wash, right?
Right. And I had actually been attracted to a true story about an American fighter plane that had crashed off the coast of Wales. The pilot had escaped, and the plane would disappear for years, but the shifting sands and the tides would reveal it. And the plane was called the Maid of Harlech. So you can still, on some occasions, the Maid of Harlech, this fighter plane, will appear in the water. The sands will reveal it, and then the tides will take it back out. So I just thought the idea of that a disappearing aircraft was very interesting. So I just moved that to the Norfolk coast and this on the Wash, which is a narrow estuary where the tides roar in and roar out, and it's a very interesting geographic anomaly. And it's the kind of place where a plane would appear and disappear. So we have a German bomber that has a mysterious cargo discovered.
So if the plane reappears, the question is, are there any bodies or by now skeletons on board? And if there are, whose might they be, right?
Right.
But you can already tell from this that Billy's leave in Norfolk is not going to actually just be R&R, right? And I thought that was a little cruel. But nonetheless, it would be hard to write a really interesting book if he was just loafing
Right,
around
yeah,
in
just going
Norfolk.
to the pub and having a beer,
Right,
playing
exactly.
cards.
So,
Yeah.
you already knew. Um, and then, of course, the other question in a long-running series like yours is when there's a subcast that, accrues to the series about, so are any other people going to go on leave or are they going to somehow be summoned to the place where Billy's on leave?
Well, Kaz, Billy's partner and friend, is there because his sister is convalescing at Seton Manor. So if you've read the past few books, you know that Kaz's sister was released from a concentration camp and spirited out of Nazi-occupied Europe after medical experiments were performed on her. So she's at Seton Manor with a nurse attending to her. And I just want to tell a quick little story about this nurse's name. Um, when I was at the university,
Sorry, but I just assume Patrick turned it off before a blade comes loose, assassinates us.
I was wondering what that was.
It's the fan or a very large bug, but I think, yeah.
So when I was a sophomore at the University of Connecticut, I went one Christmas season to Constitution Plaza in Hartford, which is an open walkway above the streets with stores and stuff, and you can look down into the office windows. And I saw a cleaning woman working. It was at night, the lights were on, and she was all alone cleaning. And I just thought she just looked so lonely, and I named her Agnes Day for a Lamb of God, Agnes Day. And I said, someday I'm going to write a story about Agnes Day. So Agnes Day in this book is not a cleaning lady. She's the nurse, but I finally got to have a character named Agnes Day, and she appears in this book.
It's a really interesting name origin.
Yeah.
Good for you. So you're not spelling Day, D-E-I.
No, it's D-A-Y. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But still,
But the inference is there.
I got it. Right. So, Sir Richard Seton, tell us a little bit about him because we haven't seen a ton of him so far in the series.
No, he's a one-armed sea captain whose arm went down with his ship in the First World War, and he has a shadowy secret job with British intelligence. Even I don't know exactly what it is, but it's been alluded to over time. So, but in this book, he's mainly there to serve as host to Billy and Diana and Angelica and Agnes Day, who is living at the house to care for her. But there is some, I don't want to get into a lot of spoilers, but there's a mysterious body found in this bomber when they take it out, lift it, hoist it out of the water, and Sir Richard becomes a suspect
He
in a
does.
murder. It's
Although
not
an
a German
impro-
crew.
No, but he's an improbable suspect because of the one arm and all the rest of it, although he could be.
He could be.
Yeah.
Well,
So, naturally, anybody associated with Sir Richard has to rally around.
he does,
And,
but Billy is in a tough spot because if he rallies around him too much,
right.
he'll be seen as, cutting a few favors. So he's got to conduct an investigation that will uh, be appropriate and not give Sir Richard a free pass. So a little bit of tension there. Billy ends up getting kicked out of the house for a while, and you know, it's never
So,
easy in a quiet English village.
no. So it's kind of an Agatha Christie setting.
Well, I had a little fun thinking in those terms
Sure.
and doing, the standard sort of English village mystery with a cast of characters and things slowly get revealed about them that in a way that I found interesting.
So, in kind of classic older British mystery, there's often a bumbling police detective inspector, which takes our man on the job, in this case, Billy, to um, kind of either work with him or ignore him, but given a mandate to solve the crime. But Billy gets an official mandate, doesn't he?
He does. There is in this town a top secret facility. What the British government took over a lot of stately homes and manors in the countryside, and in this manor, Marston Hall is a facility for high-level German prisoners of war. And the story that I really wanted to tell, in addition to all this, is about the Ritchie boys. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of them. Probably not. It's not very well known, but the Ritchie boys were a group of mainly German and Austrian Jews who had come to this country in the 1930s as young kids, grew up speaking English, but also were native German speakers. And they were recruited as interrogators because the best way to interrogate somebody is in their own language. And knowing not just knowing their language, but knowing their customs and their background. So there are a group of Ritchie boys at this top secret facility, and their existence is a secret. Um, the reason a lot of people don't know about them today is these were the guys who were told after the war, now don't say anything about what you did in the war because it's top secret. And they said, okay. And they never really told their story. So it's just come out recently about this. So they produced a lot of actual intelligence interrogating German prisoners of war because they were able to just get into their heads so well. And that's the secret that Billy is really brought in to protect and find out who the actual killer is.
So, when the Sands reveal the the plane,
Yeah.
And locals go down to bring it up, so to speak, who are the bodies that are found on the plane?
Well, this isn't much of a spoiler, really, because it happens early on. So they hoist this plane out of the water, and they find the body of, I think, the bombardier and a gunner, but an arm hanging out the window is dressed in a British Army uniform. And the owner of Marston Hall had gone missing about the time this plane crashed. So the mystery is, how did this British officer end up in a crashed German bomber? And just to give you a little insight into my process, when I wrote that, I had no idea how to answer that question. I enjoy presenting myself with the same puzzle that I'm presenting Billy, because I figure he's got to figure it out. I should figure it out too. So I had no idea how, and I tried to populate this village with a cast of characters that would at some point grate on each other in a way that would reveal to me who the killer was. So the beginning of this book is a little different in that it's a kind of a prologue written in the third person.
Wait, you said who the killer was, but we don't know for sure that the British officer, if indeed it is a British officer, not just somebody dressed in a British officer's
that's one of the things.
uniform, which is a
Yeah,
possibility.
that's one of the
We
things
don't
they
know if he
discuss.
just died in the crash
Yeah.
at the outset. And then if it is the British officer, a real one, in his British officer's uniform, where's the German pilot?
Mhm.
Or did the British officer fly the plane in from Germany?
And
I mean, there's a
complicating all
number,
this,
there's a
yeah.
number of really interesting questions here.
And complicating all that is the fact that Sandringham House is the royal residence that's owned by whoever is the current king or queen of England, is 12 miles down the coast. So the worry now, the royals didn't go there during the war because it was right on the coast. It would have been an easy target for a commando raid. But actually they did. They did sneak in there, and they stayed in the cottages surrounding the big ornate Sandringham House. So that's another flashpoint here. Is a worry about is this a hit on the
Right.
on the
Now,
royal
I've actually
family?
been to Sandringham House, and it's not a palace at all. It's just kind of a country home with a lot of bedrooms where everybody got up to mischief until possibly, well, even including perhaps the present royal family. But it's not all that imposing, and it does have a lot of property around it. You may remember that towards the end of his life, Prince Philip was arrested for driving without a license on the grounds of Sandringham House, and I think he, had an accident or something, and they worked out that he, was piloting cars around. So the Queen had to take over
Forgot
and
about that,
drive
yeah.
right while he was there. I love that. Yeah, I thought it was so great that that he was still doing that. But anyway, it's very much a country house and a retreat,
Yeah.
for them. And you, in your story, you do have a few royals kind of sneaking up there.
Right. Princess Elizabeth and Margaret actually did dig potatoes there. They had a big garden, victory garden kind of thing. So they did sneak in there and stay. No, I mean, they could do whatever they wanted, I guess. But there is a record of her digging potatoes. So Billy gets a little sight of Princess Elizabeth.
Right. So some of the locals you're dealing with are worried about security at Sandringham House. It wouldn't be that tough for, as you point out, a German commando raid, to light there. So that's part of the excitement of
Right.
what's going on there. But let's talk about the treasure.
Okay. So, King John, bad King John. I have a friend who's into British history and takes tours of British castles, and he is adamant that King John really wasn't all that bad. But this is the King John from Robin Hood, really bad guy.
The evil brother of Richard the
Right.
Lionheart, right?
Yeah.
We know that.
But anyway, Richard, so this wash, it's like a notch. If you can, actually, in the book, there's a map. So buy the book.
Yeah, by the way,
map.
there is an excellent map. I forgot to tell you that. You might want to look it up.
When the tides are out, it's like a marshland that you can walk over, and there are tracks. The local guides would know how to, because it was a massive shortcut, if you can imagine, because they would have to go way around the estuary. And he was in a hurry to get somewhere, I forget where, and he decided to go when the tide was out, and with his baggage train, with his treasure. And in those days, the kings of England would take their treasure with them, their crown jewels. They just wouldn't leave them at home. But unfortunately, the tide came in quicker than they expected, and dozens and dozens of knights and servants and carts of treasure were washed away by the incoming tide. No one's ever found it. People are still hunting for it. And you can imagine that if somebody back in the 1940s had a glimmer of an idea where it might be, that would be something maybe worth killing for. Who knows?
There's no one place it would be. I mean, the truth is it would have to be scattered, all over from the action of the the water, no. Well, now they don't have to look it up. I was saying you'd have to go home and look it up, but it's true. It's a legendary treasure, and England's still spewing up Viking hordes and other
Right.
stuff. Um, I've been to the British Museum, and where they have some really great displays of Viking and other treasures that have been dug up over the years. And um, there's still what are they called? The guys that go out there with the like Geiger,
Detectorists.
the detectorists, right? In fact, there's even a TV series
Yeah.
called The Detectorists where they, take out their metal detecting things and sweep over the land. But it's very complicated. Did you look into, if you find treasure, the ownership of it is an extremely complicated subject.
I would bet, and given that these were the crown jewels of England, that the current monarchs would have something to say about who owns
Well,
them.
yeah, if it's found,
Yeah,
they would
yeah.
they would own it. That although, as I said to Jim, they might pay a finder's fee, but there's some real questions if you do find property like that, whether it belongs to the crown, whether it belongs to. It's hard to claim it personally.
Right. And in reality, I'm betting after being an instant expert in this, the tides just wash this stuff
Yeah,
way,
way out to
and
sea.
yeah, that's probably
Our friend Clive Cussler has spent, or did spend before he died, at least a decade looking for the Bonhomme Richard, which is John Paul Jones' ship that foundered off the coast of England. It was higher up. It was off Whitby or somewhere. No, it was off, what is it, Flamborough Head, I think it is,
I
which
think
is a
so. Yeah.
chunk of land sticking out. But anyway, out into the North Sea. Never found it, despite the absolute best equipment. It was a wooden ship, so the odds are good, they finally concluded, that it was washed away. This pull of the sea was such that it's scattered all over, and maybe the wood by now, is kind of largely rotted, and there wasn't enough metal to recover. But I think you're right. I think that whatever, and while we're talking treasure, it probably wasn't that big. I mean, England wasn't a very rich country in the 13th century,
Right.
so it's probably like a crown and, assorted things. That it probably wasn't a lot.
And they enumerated, like, it was also his plates, silver plates,
Right.
and, household stuff. So it wasn't
Right.
all just.
So it's probably just somewhere scattered or
Yeah.
disappeared into the North Sea. But it's a great thought.
It's a good motive
Hmm.
for murder.
So the questions that you have to answer now that you set this up are: why was the British guy, if he was a British guy, why was he in a plane with two dead German um, people on a mission? And then where's the pilot?
Well,
If the British guy is authentic, where's the German pilot? And why did nobody ever find him or rate a fuss? Because most of the time when people floundered, um, they turned themselves in or they were found and they became prisoners of war.
right.
So,
So Billy does have to track down all the bodies that.
Right.
It wasn't only one bomber crashing; there were lots of them crashing all the time in 1942. So he has to go through that process. Um, and also mixed into this is, a lot of people, if you've watched Peaky Blinders, certainly you know about Mosley and the British Union of
the
Fascists.
black shirts.
Yeah, the black shirts. In this book, they're the moderates because we have groups like the Right Club, the British Union of Imperialists, who were formed because they thought the black shirts were too easy on the Jews and the dark-skinned Commonwealth people. So the Right Club was a really ultra-fascist, racist group that at this time in the war in 1944, they had all been imprisoned as soon as war was declared. So Mosley and his bunch and all these other groups were imprisoned. And by 1944, the British government figured, well, the danger of invasion is over. We can let these guys out. But the Right Club people went right back to work, and uh, they had a lot of schemes going on. And they're the ones that I was fascinated by because I never knew about them. I never knew that there were people that thought that Mosley was too nice to not too
There was
moderate.
a
in his
serious white
views.
supremacist
Yeah.
thing going on, and quite a few of the British really were Nazi sympathizers, and we don't think about them, just in the same way that France has an historic um, anti-Semitic, very cruel history, and nobody was without a taint in all of this mix. But yeah, you're right. I often wondered why they let any of them out until the war was over.
No, they did let them because they weren't charged with anything. They were just thrown in prison under some Defense of the Realm Act. So they were never actually tried and found guilty.
So it wasn't that different than the Japanese internment camps here, was it?
Essentially, no. It was just a government
Kind of
action.
the same thing.
And they thought it was fine to let them go. So.
Right. Jim's colleague Naomi Hirahara from the same publisher wrote a brilliant book last year called Clark and Division about the internment of the Japanese in California and the West, in Chicago, which is why it's called Clark and Division. And then in her new book, The Consequences of the War Being Over, and these people who'd been totally uprooted from their homes moving back to Los Angeles and trying to put their lives back together. So, it happened here too. It isn't just Britain having internal groups. And then, of course, we know what's going on today. So, it's like, there we are. Right. So there's an awful lot going on in this book.
Yep. It's under the skin of every quiet English village, there's always a lot going on.
So Diana is not actually at her father's estate when the book opens. The plan is for her to come down from London and join Billy for his, quote, leave, which you've just trashed.
She does get there eventually. She's held up by, in the last book, she was in France distributing gold to members of the French resistance that had helped Allied pilots and soldiers escape, people whose family members were killed. And she's in trouble with people in the government who think she was giving money to communists, so they want to hold her accountable for that. So she has a bit of bureaucratic trouble, but we may revisit that.
Why not?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, her sister was imprisoned with Kaz's sister. Was it Ravensbrück?
Ravensbrück.
Right. And so the sister, Diana's sister, died from whatever happened to her in the camp. And those atrocities nobody really even wants to contemplate, but were terrible. So, so we have Kaz, his wounded sister, Sir Richard. Diana has a brother. Does he come into this story?
Not in the story. He's been sort of like the brother that I kind of forgot about for a number of books, but he's going to be in next year's book. So he'll be back in the picture, but he's not there on leave. So we also have a housekeeper that I asked for permission from Charles Todd to name her Mrs. Rutledge, after Ian Rutledge, because I love his Ian Rutledge books. So he said, fine. He even charted out, that could be his aunt or his cousin. I said, well, no, we won't get into that. But so the housekeeper, Mrs. Rutledge, wields a mean shotgun when she has to. So she's in the mix as well.
I hadn't even thought of that. It could be Ian Rutledge's widow if he ends up dying of his World War I. Yeah. Wow, wouldn't that be cool? Right. You'll have to think about that. So one character we haven't talked about, because you do have real people in these books. Mm-hmm. That's one of my very favorite people, Ian Carmichael.
I was really entranced by the notion of just setting this book in the same setting as The Nine Tailors, the Dorothy L. Sayers story.
Which is many people's favorite.
It's great.
This is the bell ringing book, if you don't know it. This is a mystery that depends upon the English art of bell ringing, which is extremely complicated. And I actually went to visit the church in Norfolk where, in theory, this takes place. It takes incredible strength and stamina to be a bell ringer.
If you ever try to pull a church bell, it's not easy.
And you have to keep it up because, it's not anything anybody undertakes lightly. Mm-hmm. And there's a captain, and there's the whole rehearsal thing that goes on there. Have you ever read it, The Nine Tailors? If you have not read the Dorothy Sayers, you really should. In some ways, it makes the least sense of her. Well, none of her plots made a lot of sense, but that wasn't why you read Dorothy Sayers. she even got the mushrooms wrong in the book where somebody died of mushroom poisoning. She got the wrong mushroom, which I've always kind of loved. Um, Unlike Christie, I mean, Agatha Christie worked in what's the word I want, in pharmacy in the war. So she was actually very well acquainted with, isn't that terrible? I know it, we need to get it fixed. She was very well acquainted with poisons and how they worked, but Dorothy Sayers was not. And I've often wondered if she ever actually did any bell ringing.
Well, her father was the rector at the, or Victor
Right.
at that church, and they did a lot of bell ringing there. So she was exposed to it.
So she
whether
at least
did
sort
or
of knew how
didn't
it worked, right?
So I was just happy to be in that setting.
Right.
And then I just, for some reason, I started looking into Ian Carmichael, who played Lord Peter Wimsey in the Masterpiece Mystery series.
All the way up to the 4 books about Dorothy Vane. So he was in the early ones, but he was not. Edward Petheridge took over the series for the 4 books, including Gaudy Night, about Harriet Vane. And we were agreeing that Ian Carmichael was not really a romantic hero. In Edward Petheridge was a better Lord Peter, I think, when it came to those. But he was brilliant as the young and sort of ass, because he called himself a silly ass. He was kind of perfect for those, wasn't he?
And it turns out that the actor, Ian Carmichael, joined the army and became a tank commander, was engaged in combat in France and Holland, and was actually the head. Well, I won't get too far, but he was the head of a tank squadron that would go ahead of the soldiers and explode mines in the minefields with these big flails of chains that would explode the mines. And they would have to be the first going into battle at 5 miles an hour. So, I mean, he fought a real war up close and personal. And I thought, well, maybe Captain Carmichael was sent to this top secret facility because the Ritchie boys are interrogating a German prisoner of war who knows about the defenses in Holland that they're going to go through. So, sure, that'll work. So we have Ian Carmichael, who at this point has just given up his acting career for the Army, is an old boyfriend kind of sort of Diana, so there's a little jealousy with Billy there. And even though Ian Carmichael was the son of an optician from York, he still came across to me as a bon vivant, kind of upper class, little bit of a twit, because that's how he wrote his 2 memoirs. He wrote them in that voice. It was almost like Lord Peter. So I had a lot of fun with him. So he's on stage for a while, helping in the investigation and working with the Ritchie boys to get this information that's needed for an upcoming offensive. And I thought it was just fun to show what he really did in the war, because it's not something you ever hear about. And if you ever see a stage picture of Ian Carmichael, his hand is always in his pocket because he lost a finger when a tank hatch slammed down on it, and he always hid that. So watch next time you see a picture of him.
So I have a very different version of Ian Carmichael. In 1986, I was in York, and I was staying in the Bootham Bar Hotel, which is, it's not even a hotel, it's more like a B&B. And the point of staying there was that you were high above the city and you were right next to York Minster. So when the bells would ring and you would be above the city of York, you could sort of pretend you were still medieval, whatever. And right down the road was the Royal York Theatre. And when I got there, Ian Carmichael was playing in Pride and Prejudice. So I couldn't resist that. Fortunately, I was able to get a ticket. And so I went to see the production. And it was the most interesting staging. Many of you may have seen like the movie versions of Pride and Prejudice, which are wonderful. So the way they did it at the Royal York Theatre, Ian Carmichael was Mr. Bennet. And he sat throughout the entire thing in a chair in the middle of his library where, and all of the rest of the cast revolved around him. And he would actually quote entire passages of the book.
Wow.
That was his job. It was a fascinating production, but he was so different from Lord Peter. And I kept having this kind of a hard time, because the Lord Peter things had already played in 1986 because they were fairly old.
Yeah.
So He was actually a very gifted actor,
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
but I didn't realize he had that great war experience. You know, Jimmy Stewart was played a major role in World War II. Um, he was, I'm trying to remember, was he a pilot? I think
Oh
so.
yeah, bomber
Something
pilot.
like that,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
There were a number of actors who did very brave things, and then there were a number of actors like John Wayne, who is everybody's hero, who actually wasn't heroic in World War II, but there you go. I can't remember all that because I was born in 1940, so, you
Clark
know,
Gable
it's,
was a gunner on a
yeah, he
B-17.
was, yeah. And a lot of people, you know, and all if they often entertained the troops, even if they
Yeah.
weren't in combat, that kind of thing. So it's nice that you brought in. Remember Glenn Miller, who played for the and went down in the Channel, and nobody ever found him.
Yeah.
So there were, you know, American entertainers who also played some kind of a role in
Yeah.
the war. That's an interesting thought. You haven't. I wonder when he went down. You haven't worked Glenn Miller in yet.
No, no.
There's a thought.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Right. Or the Duke of Devonshire and what's that went down and opened up the dukedom for he was married to Kathleen Kennedy, remember?
Oh,
And
okay.
he
Yep,
also
yep,
he
yep.
was a pilot who
Yep.
also died and
Yep.
eventually we got the last of the Mitford sisters, Deborah, married the Duke of the younger brother and when the older one died in the war, then his brother moved up to become the Duke and Deborah of the six Mitford sisters is the only one that actually ended up with a well, not the only one, because Nancy and who's the other one that was the author?
Oh boy.
Nancy, Nancy Mitford, who moved. Isn't she the one that? No, she's the one that wrote about Jessica. Was Jessica the one that moved to California, I think, and became a novelist? And Nancy wrote biographies of like Louis the 14th.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's it.
There's too many Mitford sisters to keep track of.
Six. And one of them married Oswald Mosley, the black shirt guy
Right,
that we were
right.
talking about. And that was extremely. And then one of them went to Berlin because she was in love with Hitler
Right.
and eventually shot herself
Right.
when Hitler didn't reciprocate. You know, they were like the quintessential bizarre English aristocratic family of the 1930s, right? Books have been written about
Yep.
them.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you still have time to work one of
Sure.
them
Yeah.
into this whole saga. So you really enjoy bringing in real people, don't you?
With what?
You enjoy bringing in real people as well as your fictional
I do
people.
because when I discover that, it's like the intersection of reality or my reality with these stories, and I can't believe that this all could have happened. So it just makes it real for me. And I just briefly say next year's book, I think I went one better than Ian Carmichael. David Niven is in it, and
He was another war hero, wasn't he?
he
And you
was
still have Ian Fleming in the wings.
yeah he was he had been in the British Army and was an officer before his acting career, and he got out in the 30s, became an actor, went to California, was doing well, and when war was declared, the British Embassy ordered all the actors in California to stay there and make propaganda films for to support the British war effort. He just went back and joined up and didn't get in trouble for it. Winston Churchill actually said, "You would have been despicable if you had not done that, young man." But he was trained as a commando. He worked with some of Montgomery's intelligence people. Was on the front lines. So I had to put him in, and he was the kind of character that almost took over the book. I had to really kick him off stage for a while because he was so much fun to write. I just there's some great quotes during the Battle of the Bulge. He was stopped and asked for a password, because they were concerned about Germans dressed as Americans. And here's this Englishman driving around the lines, and he said, "Well, chaps, I don't know the password, but I did start with Betty Grable in a bachelor father or something like that." So he had a quick wit. Whether he actually said them or not, or made it all up afterwards, I don't know. But it's great stuff. So he was a lot of fun to write.
He was. He was a really charming guy, and came back to Hollywood and continued to have a significant career.
Wow.
Yeah. So, questions from any of you? We've probably said more than we actually should about Proud Sorrow, but what would you like to ask Jim?
How did you find out about the Ritchie boys? Did you in your own research, or did someone point you towards them?
There was a book came out. Our Sons, Our Fathers, I think. I just saw it on a shelf, and it was about the Ritchie boys. It was a German filmmaker made a film in 2004 called The Ritchie Boys, and told their story. And they literally kept their mouths shut all these decades. Now there's some survivors who are going to schools and describing what went on in their work. And it really, the detail is incredible. I mean, they really got into the heads of the Germans and messed with them significantly. And some of them were killed. Some of them were on the front lines, interrogating captured prisoners on the front lines. During the Battle of the Bulge, they were overrun, and the Germans who were then had been freed pointed them out and said, "These Jews over here are from Berlin," and they were executed. So it's good their story is finally being told. And they were trained at Camp Ritchie, as were a lot of people. So the term Ritchie boys came to after the war. During the war, nobody called them anything. They were just there.
Anyway.
I was curious if you travel to these places in North Africa and Italy.
Not North Africa, no, because I read enough accounts of what it was like that flies and no beer just didn't cut it. But yes, I visited sites in Sicily and Italy and France and all across England, and it really helps to get the lay of the land, the feel of what it's really like. So about to ramp up some travel time now that it's sort of safe to go. It's been helpful.
You had one book, at least that I know of, that was set in the Pacific theater,
Yes.
and only one.
Yeah.
Is there, have you thought about doing another one? Is there a way to bring that theater?
If I could come up with a workable scenario, this was one where I realized I had missed the opportunity to put together Billy Boyle from Boston and the Kennedys from Jack Kennedy from Boston. And I found a gap in my earlier book where there was 2 or 3 months that I had skipped, which was just at the time of PT 109 and Jack Kennedy. So I was able to put together a scenario that worked. One of the strengths, I think, of this series is that it tells the story of the war chronologically, but it's also a weakness because if I've missed something, it's hard to have to go back and say, oh, it was all a dream, you know. But I would love to if and it may be that at the end of the war, as the war is still going on, but the war in the Pacific was so different. I mean, so brutal and right. Yeah.
No,
Thanks a lot.
but you know, he could go to Singapore or Shanghai
Right.
or even Burma because Burma was still British.
Right. Yeah.
And Billy could be sent on some kind of a mission to Asia, you know, towards the end or
It would have to
post-war.
be more, not on the island fighting, because
Right.
there
No,
was
no.
no room for a murder mystery on those islands. But
No, it was just slaughter. Unless you're Stephen Hunter, whose 47th Samurai is my personal favorite, Stephen Hunter, and it starts on one of the Japanese islands, and it's brilliant. But no, I don't think that Billy. But you know, there's a lot of. We were talking at dinner. There's a lot. People didn't get demobbed as soon as the war was over. There were people who stayed in the service and did all kinds of things after the war. The world didn't just sort itself out right away. And Billy could easily be, you know, detailed to, because a lot of Asia was British. You know, British outposts, Hong Kong, Singapore. Malaysia, I think, was still British,
Yeah.
and certainly Burma was still, and India.
Yeah.
So, you know, there is an opportunity perhaps for him to go in those directions, and you haven't
my
visited.
dad was stationed in India, so
Yeah.
well, could have Harold Benn, you know.
That you kind of have a plot of line where you kind of wanted to take it, or that after each book did sort of a new opportunity open itself for you?
In terms of actual plots, they just reveal themselves. The more I look and keep an eye out for things, but the overall arc is really the story of the effect of war on people, Billy in particular, but also all the people around him. And I think that's the theme I try to carry through, that there's an effect that war has. And it shows in Billy and his, I think he's a deeper character. He's gone through some severe emotional trauma, and he has to. It just has to. And I'm trying to show the effect on all the people grouped around him as well. And that's one of the things I liked about this book, is I could take a whole village and show how the war has affected individual people, this microcosm of an English village. So that to me is the overarching story. And where it'll end, I'm not quite sure.
One of the things I love about this series is it underlines just how global the whole conflict is, or was rather, because we travel with Billy, through so many different. I loved your book about the Vatican. I hadn't really thought about how difficult it was with this, little ecclesiastical state in the middle of occupied Italy, and how dangerous it was, and how it was just a matter of a few feet
Right.
that
I learned a lot.
separated people.
I had a lot of assumptions going into that book, and I learned a lot from it.
I know. I mean, the role of Pope Pius is difficult to assess. Was he actually a sympathizer or an enabler, or was he, knowing how vulnerable it all was, he doing his best to keep everybody surviving? It's very difficult to know. Yep. So I do think, that the theater, the size of the war, the involvement of so many people whose lives were disrupted, and the Official Secrets Act, which people took seriously then before social media, when it would be impossible.
Yeah.
But you said that people didn't talk about the Ritchie boys and all, but people were really serious when they took that,
The women
signed
worked
the
at
act.
Bletchley
Right.
never talked about it.
Yeah. So that made a difference. Did you have a question, sir?
Soldiers who were traumatized by the war,
Sure.
who came back and
Never
Yeah.
talked about it. No,
Mhm.
that's right. Or fought on Iwo Jima or something. No, there wasn't much attention paid to something like PTSD then. And in the First World War, the guys were ashamed, and people often made fun of them as cowards instead of recognizing how traumatized they were by the trenches. And well, that's the Inspector Rutledge series, I think,
Right.
is great. In the Hamish is
Yeah.
really PTSD.
Mhm.
He's not a real person.
there is a character in this one that suffering from
Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's my little homage to. No, it's okay, to the Ian Rutledge series. I wanted to show that and show the effect in another war.
Yeah, I miss Carolyn.
Yeah.
Yeah, Charles is good.
Sweetheart.
Charles is good, but it was one of those things where two people, it was a mother and son, two people writing together were better than two people writing separately. And
Mhm.
and there used to be an amazing British. They wrote as Manning Coles. They were a man and a woman, and they were not related. I think they were neighbors or something. But they wrote some of the really great World War II spy. They had a hero called Tommy Hamilton, who was kind of an MI5 or 6 guy, and always had kind of a humorous approach.
Mhm.
But some of their books were just fabulous. And then one of them died, and it just didn't work. After that, the one that was left just
Wow.
couldn't keep up
Mhm.
the voice. So, there we are. It happens. Is there anybody else? Well, in that case, thank you, Patrick. Are there any questions from the audience? Sorry, I forgot to ask you.
Oh, thank you.
Me too. I read it in real time and absolutely loved it.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. So, thank you, virtual audience, for watching it. Thank you, live audience, for coming. And I do have a kind of unusual giveaway this evening. I don't know. Did we do numbers tonight? No, we didn't. All right.
Mhm.
So we'll have to come up with a key question. So one thing I have to give away, because I haven't seen one for so long, is that I picked up an Ellery Queen mystery magazine when I was at VoucherCon. I mean, I feel like it's a relic. Um, So we have that. And then I brought this funny thing. I don't know where I got it, but this is a teacup that has a place. I love it because it's sort of Imperial England, right? The Raj. And the the head of the elephant's where you put the tea bag, while, so it doesn't sit. So what do we want to do? Do you want to ask a question? Whoever can answer it wins.
Oh boy.
One of the or the other.
Uh, I'm drawing a complete blank. Uh, how many books are in the Billy Boyle series?
18. He's right.
18.
Would you like the mystery magazine or the teacup?
Teacup.
Oh, great. I love this teacup. I wanted it to go to a happy home.
There you go.
All right.
Love it.
Mhm.
Okay. I think maybe a location. Oh no, who's the missing character? We've talked about Kaz and we've talked about Billy. All right.
Yay. Well done.
Pass this back to this lady, right? I didn't even have to finish that one, did I? And you'll be pleased to know that he does manage to make his way to the village. Yep.
Yeah.
So it would be hard to leave him out at this
And he
point.
brings food, surprisingly.
Yeah. I think, he played a really big role in the Russian one, with the what were they called? The Night Angels?
The
Night Witches,
Witches,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Not angels, but witches, right? So Big Mike was a pivotal character in that, right?
Yep.
Right. So, well, thank you, Jim. It was wonderful to see you again.
Thank you for having
all
me.
For coming. If you'd like to get your book signed, Jim can just stay right where he is, and you could take a picture, whatever you'd like. Right. Why? She's so happy on the floor, right?